In news just in, police are in the process of raiding the last known hideout of escaped rapist and murderer Thabo Bester. Bester, of course, on the run after escaping from the Correctional Centre in Bloemfontein in May last year. eNCA Silindelo Masikane has been on that story. She joins me now. Good afternoon to you, Slee. I understand this is the very same house that you showed us last week. Tell us what's been going on there.
Yes, it is, Sally. We are at the last place in which we know that Thabo Bester, as well as Dr. Nandipa Magudumana, resided in. This particular house, or should I say mansion, 12 million rand mansion, is based here in Hyde Park. And what we do know is that it does seem as though new information has been obtained by the police that warranted that they obtain a search warrant for this property. We don't know exactly what that new information is, but of course we do know in terms of the information received from the property developer that some chaos essentially transpired after the news broke that Thabo Bester was alive. We know that Dr. Nandipa as well as Thabo Bester fled this particular property in a hurry, leaving much of their furniture and their belongings inside. We understand that a couple of days later, bouncers or private security officials then came to the home and essentially also just cleaned it out in terms of the possessions that belonged to Bester as well as Dr. Nandipa. Now at this moment in time, you can't really see anything. It does seem as though police officials and forensics have actually gone inside. Much earlier on, what we were seeing, Sally, is police officials and forensics officials getting into those hazmat suits, those white hazmat suits, the protective gear before they went into the property. We know that the property developers are also inside the property. We know that police arrived here at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we do know in terms of the information that we have about this property is that Dr. Nandipa as well as Thabo Bester essentially signed the lease for this property back in 2020. I'm just going back to my notes, Sally. Yeah. We know that in 2020, Nandipa started looking for property with the property developer, saying that her and her husband want to move. And so the property developer showed them this particular property. And we understand that at the time, Bester was using the alias TK Nkwana. Right. We know that Nandipa paid for this rental upfront, a year upfront fee, actually. And we understand that when she moved in, the rental for the property was around 60,000 rand a month. Just to go back, Sally, we also know that actually when Nandipa was viewing this property, Bester was actually on a video call with Nandipa doing a walkthrough of the particular property, showing Bester exactly what it looks like, and they loved it. And in fact, when they moved in, they then completely renovated this particular property. And of course, we know that Bester escaped essentially in May of 2022, but by then Nandipa had already been living in this particular property. And we know from speaking to the owners of the property as well, is that they did begin defaulting on the rent, which of course then sparked some issues with regards to them residing here. But what was also interesting, Sally, is that next door, I'm going to ask Nuku to just pan to my left. Next door, that particular property as well, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it from here. We'll try and move a little bit closer and maybe show the visuals from inside one of the smaller gates. Is that the property right next door, that property as well was actually being leased out by Dr. Nandipa and Bester, and they were in the process of renovating that property on the other side as well into a new business premises. So at this point, forensics are still on the scene. Actually, I see one of those officials coming out now, and at this point, we're yet to find out exactly what they're searching for. But of course, we know that a manhunt is underway for Bester, and at this this point, sources are telling us that he actually might be out of the country.
We're watching this man approaching in this protective gear. Now, my understanding is that journalists have been able to gain access to this house, walk through this house. I don't understand why the police would arrive at this point, unless it's a second visit, but suddenly decked out in this protective gear. Do you have any understanding to what they might be looking for?
Not at this point, Sally. I am trying to push my sources in terms of just giving us anything they can as to what in particular they're looking for. And like you said, I mean, I've been in this house, I've walked in this house, I've opened doors, trying to get a sense of the living quarters. I can tell you that it's fully renovated with a state-of-the-art kitchen, 4 bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms. It's got a tennis court, it's got a pool. It's a beautiful home. So at this point, we're not quite sure what they're looking for, but we know that what prompted them to get a search warrant was new information that was obtained by the police. And I think at this point, they're just looking for anything that may possibly lead them to the rearrest of Bester and possibly finding Dr. Nandipa as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to carry on chatting to you just for a few more minutes because, of course, today in Parliament, the Justice and Correctional Service Committee was meeting about this issue of Thabo Bester. They were expecting to hear from G4S. And yesterday, in fact, G4S was saying they hadn't been invited and they were quite disappointed. But then today they don't arrive. They just send their lawyer. Please explain this to us.
Yeah, quite an interesting day in Parliament as well, Sally, in terms of the developments around this case. We know that this meeting, in terms of what the chairperson was telling us about what the program was going to look like, was that the committee was expecting, of course, to hear from G4S. They were expecting to hear from Correctional Services, and they were also expecting to hear from the Ministry of Police. Now, yesterday, you would remember that we were discussing that statement by G4S where they were talking about contractual obligations, that in fact they need to be summoned under parliamentary privilege to come and address the committee. And I must tell you that the MPs didn't take too kindly to this letter, and we heard from the lawyer of G4S. Let's take a listen to what he had to say around why his clients weren't present.
Firstly, directly receive any invitation, but incidentally on Saturday heard from BCC, who was invited, that this meeting was to take place. But G4S didn't directly receive any invitation and wasn't aware that any presentation would be required from it. Now, G4S is very keen to assist this committee, but my mandate is to explain why precisely it's unable to do so without a summons. Now, the members and chairperson, honourable chairperson and members would be aware that Section 111 of the Correctional Services Act contains certain statutory confidentiality obligations for contractors and subcontractors that can't simply be waived by the contractor itself. It also has contractual confidentiality obligations to DCS under the agreements under the private-public partnership, and contractual confidentiality obligations to the employees concerned. Now, it's only by virtue of Section 22 of the Parliamentary Privileges and Immunities Act that a witness can be immunized from its liability for breach of contract or any other kind of liability in response to a summons. And that's why, as it's been explained as quickly as possible in the letter yesterday, and certainly without any intention of causing disrespect, that G4S has requested to be summoned so that it can make the appropriate witnesses and the appropriate documents available as quickly as possible. But it will need to have a summons in order to be released from its statutory and confidentiality and contractual confidentiality restraints.
All right, so G4 is saying that contractually they needed to be properly summoned. Did the committee respond? I mean, did they not summons them? Did they invite them? Did they not even invite them? I mean, what does the committee have to say here?
Well, I must say their comments were, sure, they were quite harsh on G4S's letter and the reasons why they couldn't come to Parliament. You know, it does seem as though in terms of the committee's view, G4S was aware that this sitting was happening, and they're not quite sure why. I think they wanted perhaps a personal invite in terms of them coming to address the committee, because, I mean, first on the agenda was going to be submissions by G4S security, and in fact there were questions around perhaps the sitting continuing and G4S then making their submissions at a later stage, but some MPs saying that they need to follow procedure, and procedurally they need to start investigating this matter where it actually began, and that is at the Mangaung Correctional Centre, which was being privately run by G4S security. So then, of course, the sitting was postponed, and the chair then announcing that they're going to summon G4S security. Let's take a listen.
The resolution of the committee is that one, G4S will be summoned to appear on the date that will be agreed upon between ourselves and the Speaker of the National Assembly, and the date will not be the one as determined by G4S. We will determine the date together with the Speaker of the National Assembly, and the date is it should be quite soon, because we want to conclude the matter as soon as possible.
Yeah, so Parliament hopefully will get to hear from G4S quite soon, as they say. Meanwhile, we'll leave you to keep an eye on what's going on with the police swooping in on that home, last known home of Thabo Bester, in those protective suits, as you say, based potentially on new information. And hopefully you'll find out a little bit more, and we can chat to you a bit later. Thank you so much, though, senior reporter Silindelo Masikane there. Now still ahead.